Hey everybody, this is Anthony Wilson and you're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Anthony Wilson, how are you, man? Thank you so much for taking the time to connect.
I'm doing very well. Thanks, John. I so appreciate you thinking of me for this series. Thanks so much.
You bet, man. You are a fascinating guy, and I've got so many questions I want to ask you about. Your obviously number one priority is your jazz guitar playing, which is just amazing, and all the people you've played with and all the records you've made. But let's also talk about your do you call it singer-songwriter stuff? It seems singer-songwriter to me. Or what? How do you classify stuff like The Plan of Paris?
Absolutely. I mean, it partakes of the singer-songwriter ethos, and atmosphere. For me, it's a natural outgrowth of just my overall musical practice over the years. I mean, I grew up here in Los Angeles in the 1970s, near Laurel Canyon. It would be impossible to have avoided that being a part of my soundtrack, really. I had one friend of mine, his father managed Joni Mitchell and managed Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I had another friend who played with Rick Danko and Paul Butterfield, and so we as kids running around in Los Angeles, we just heard this music. I was taken to go see Cat Stevens at the Troubadour when I was a little kid. Yeah. So that's what I listened to, and at the same time, I had a father who was a jazz musician, and coming from him was this other atmosphere, this other set of mysteries that for a very young kid, it's almost too much to know what's going on. But then as I got a little older, into my early teens, I started to be much more curious about those sounds, the artists that I heard him talk about, and of course, things that were in the record collection, Charlie Parker, Stan Getz, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane. So, for me, it's all lived side by side for a long time. And the idea of having things be separate was the thing that I wanted to dispense with starting around 10 years ago. And I didn't feel that it was unnatural to begin singing songs in the middle of even a set of music that was primarily instrumental. Mm-hmm. And, I just sort of float in that world now. And I would even say the two languages are becoming more integrated in a more natural way.
Yeah, man, that's really cool. I do think it might seem natural to you, but I do think it's a little unusual, and I don't think there's a whole lot of people doing it quite the way you are. And let's stay on that topic. I do have some questions about it, but I just want to mention, I also want to talk about the trio records. I know you're playing the Charles Lloyd 85th birthday bash coming up. That's something we want to talk about. Some of the people you've played with, your photography, and there's just so much we can get into. But let's stick with that a little bit. I had a feeling you would say that. I knew you were a West Coast guy, and I knew about your age, so I figured that really tracks with what I expected in terms of. Yeah, I'm a little older than you, but we grew up with Jackson Browne and those guys, and you especially being there at Bob Dylan. I mean, it's a part of our DNA in a lot of ways, but it is a little unusual for a guy who for years was pretty much known as being a pretty straight ahead jazz guitar player. Mm-hmm. And then what was your first record that you sang on? Was that only 5 or 6 years ago, something like that?
About 2016. It was called Frogtown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And man, the newer one, the one you came out with last year, The Plan of Paris, is just a beautiful record. I want to ask you about that. But Was that, I mean, you've already started talking about it, but was it a little bit of a, did it feel like a little bit of a gamble that, man, I've got this career as a jazz guitar player, and are people going to tell me to stay in my lane? I mean, what's going to happen here if I put this record out?
Well, people have done that anyway, you know, and I, you know, I've read reviews here and there, different places. People will say, well, you know, he's quite a better jazz guitar player than he is a singer, for instance. Well, it just doesn't really matter to me, or because what I feel is the most important thing to stay true to is what kind of galvanizes me and gives me energy as a musical artist, and I need those things. I need the energy source. So it's about me having what I need to do what I do. And this sense that I started having, say, around 2013, 14, of wanting to bring lyrics into some of my work and wanting to write songs, and really wondering kind of how to begin doing that, even though in my teens and in college, I played in bands and we would write songs. And so it wasn't a completely foreign thing to me, but I had spent so much time establishing myself as a dude who plays, you know, and plays jazz. And so I was a bit confused at how to begin, but there was this kind of sense of energy brewing. And that's just what I followed. And I figured, well, you know, there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to have to learn. And this is as much of a practice as beginning to learn to play a solo over a 12-bar blues, or to play a solo over a 32-bar AABA standard or something like that. These are arts to be respected. People who are great at doing those things, you know, spend years and decades and lifetimes. So under no illusions, I just sort of went for it. And there's a really great nurturing community here in Los Angeles of musicians who in many ways kind of blur those lines. People who are playing jazz, but also working with singer-songwriters, people like the drummer Jay Belrose, or people like Jim Keltner, who comes from a certain kind of background, but then deeply became one of the most legendary studio rock drummers that we ever think of. And
Nels Cline, another one. Nels Cline.
Nels Cline, absolutely. I've been, you know, I used to go hear him play, you know, when I was college age, and he'd be playing with his brother and various folks, Vinnie Golia, and playing free jazz. And then, you know, it becomes all about that person's trajectory and their journey in music. So I just felt, well, let me go for this with the support of the musicians that I know who have been incredible and add their flavor to everything that I do. And it's felt good. And over the years, honing skills. And as I say, this other aspect of kind of marrying the languages even a little bit more. And there's a current project I'm working on that I think goes quite a bit further in that direction. There's quite a bit of songwriting, but there's so much jazz in it. And so I love that.
Yeah. That's really cool, man. And it resonates so much with me and this podcast, because I don't know if you've looked at the previous episodes. You're going to be episode something like 45 or so. And it's basically been two different lanes. It's because I have a passion for jazz, and have ever since I heard, well, probably even before, I was going to say Miles Davis, but probably what got me was early 70s was the fusion stuff with Weather Report. That probably first got me into it. But I've had a passion for that for many years. But I'm also a singer-songwriter myself. And Bob Dylan has been huge to me, and John Lennon and folks like that. And so these are my two passions. And so it's almost like my guests at this point have either been serious jazz cats or they've been singer-songwriters. And you're kind of fitting in both worlds, so it's just perfect, man. It's just perfect. Let me ask you about your songwriting process. How does it differ from composing a jazz tune when you sit down and write a song like No Recap, No Intro? How does that feel in terms of, and how'd you go about that?
Well, what I would say is very common in both processes for me is landing on melody that feels strong to me, and a kind of a rhythmic foundation that feels strong to me, and that just goes across everything that I do. Even if I sit down to write an arrangement for somebody, a singer, for instance, singing a jazz song, and they say, oh, can you write a string arrangement for me? Can you create a setting for it? I'm always looking for that strong melodic content and a strong rhythmic foundation. And usually everything can kind of roll from there. I always feel like I'm a little bit of maybe a hunter, kind of tracking the prey, you know, step by step, very quietly. And for me, that helps me avoid certain patterns that I might have, or certain habits that can be ingrained if my attention isn't quite as granular and as finely attuned. Then I might go off on a tangent that's not really working. So this quality of attention and tracking maybe even what seems to me like a melody that was already there. It's there. And I'm just, if I can keep the antenna tuned enough, or my eye tuned enough to this, you know, the thought of hunting maybe is not palatable to everybody. So, but this idea of
maybe similar to photography, since you are a photographer as well, that sort of hunting.
Absolutely. A presence in the moment, and okay, no, it's almost as though that melody was there, and already it was, and I was able to pick it out and be the audience for it at that time. Somebody in the next room over, there's another melody that's in the air, and they're able to pick that out. And then with words, that sense of adding words, when it works best for me is when also that's kind of happening all at the same time.
Okay.
The curve of a melody and a sequence of words that doesn't feel like I'm forcing words to the melody, or forcing a melody to get with some words that I have. I mean, I've written in both ways. I've written out front, had a verse, and want to get that to music, and I just find it a little bit more work because you've got a meter already set up, and so, but it's very very analogous to improvising in jazz. When I'm playing at my best, when it's really working, I'm just tracking that thing that's already there. And maybe I'm creating it however we want to think of it, though. I'm not letting it drop. I'm not suddenly throwing in something that's too licky, or something that's a cliche that I always play over that set of changes. I'm really respecting, here I am with this thing, and it's very precious, and I'm holding it, and I'm responding to whatever's around. Okay, this rhythmic feels got something. If I can just follow that, then the lyrics and the melody, they fall into line, and lots of repetition, lots of mistakes, lots of going back. And then in everything, I love the process of revising. I find that to be a really you know, without it being too intellectual, but just going back and chiseling away at things and kind of, you know, completing the form, usually by reduction, taking things away.
Yeah. There, I suspect, like me, you also have in that revision process, they're just moments where, you know, okay, everything's working, but this moment, there's something about that moment that I need to fix. And you know,
yes.
So the hard thing for me is words, because if I'm writing a poem, that's one thing. Or if I'm finding a melody to fit over a chord progression, that's another thing. And both of those come relatively easy. I mean, not really, but it's not, when it's working, it's not too much of a struggle. The struggle for me comes, and you sort of pointed to this, when you're marrying the words with that melody. And I have sort of an obsession myself about, sometimes it feels like the words have to taste right, and that's not quite right, but that's sort of a metaphor or something. They just have to work perfectly at that moment of the melody. So much so that I sometimes write, I probably err on the side of writing things that are pretty obscure, don't have a good narrative line. I think my best stuff happens when I'm able to accomplish that and have a narrative line that makes sense. But it's almost like that comes third. You know, first is melody. Second, do the words or the sound of the words fit the melody at that moment? And only then do I worry about the meaning. Does that make sense to you?
I love that. And I even like the idea that there's some kind of overall intelligence that the song has that takes care of the meaning anyway. So I love this idea that I can juxtapose things that don't seem like they're part of the narrative, but there's a trust in this overall intelligence that, okay, I mean, maybe sometimes even I just put something in, or I know that this line isn't right, or it's not going to eventually work, but it gets that tasting thing happening. You know, I'm singing this line over and over, and okay, and now it starts to just morph, and then that story becomes a little bit clearer. And I also like those songs where storylines are a little bit obscure, or they might contain elements. I mean, a perfect example that I always think of with this is something like Tangled Up in Blue, that, you know, it's just, you listen to it as though it's one single narrative, but of course it's not. It's a mashup of many things, but yet it works both as a singular thing, and it works as a kind of aspects of the diamond, you know, and it's a perfect for me, an example of the songwriter allowing that to happen, in the trust that this through line of being tangled up in blue really is all that's necessary to make the thing work and touch, and maybe it even adds to kind of universality that a song can have, because listener is going, whew, oh, okay. And every listener has these various experiences.
It's funny you mentioned that song, because I've got a gig coming up next week, and that's the one cover I'm going to play. But I think a good example of that, not to be self-serving here, but one of my songs has the line, "And that phone call knocked me down, turned my whole world upside down." Now, that phone call was the phone call I received from my mom telling me that my dad had passed. But that doesn't have to be included, because everybody has received that phone call about something. So it's that personal that becomes universal. And anyway, man, We've gotten way ahead of my notes here. This is beautiful.
Okay.
And that's okay. That's fantastic. But I do want to, I've got some stuff I want to ask you about. So, gosh, where do I go here? Let's see. One question I like to ask my guests, just how do you respond to this? What were you like as a kid?
Relatively, well, I was a social kid, but I liked my group, you know, my small group, otherwise relatively shy, but I also did discover music quite as a young person and got very excited about music. So, you know, when I got a guitar around age 7, I just would go off on my own because there was this thing to explore. So yes, a sense of solitary shyness, but you know, I like to play, and when I was with my crew, you know, we were unstoppable. So, and I think I've always had that, you know, like definitely a playful, really joyful side, and then a quite thoughtful, need solitude to regenerate kind of personality. You know, that in this kind of world that they talk about these days of neurodivergent folks, you know, people with various forms of autism and various things. There's a metaphor that they use of having enough beans. It's like having enough bandwidth. But I love this idea. So it's like, sometimes I just don't have the beans to get out there and be at parties or go out, you know, go out to too many shows in a week or something. I don't have the beans, you know, I need to be home gathering the strength. And then sometimes you know, I just love to be with people, hearing other people play, going, you know, going to see art, see movies. So I think there's always been a bit of just a rhythm and a tempo of that in my life.
Yeah, cool. There are extreme introverts, and there are extreme extroverts, but I think most of us are ambiverts. So we have our both qualities. Well, let me ask you this: how would you respond to this question if you had to pick just a few of the guitar players who most inspired you, whether it's influenced your playing or just inspired you to play? Who comes to mind?
Well, it certainly starts for me along a timeline with Jimi Hendrix, with Robbie Robertson, people like that I was hearing in the 70s, you know, George Harrison, Jimmy Page, loved all of that, very inspired by that. And then as I came into jazz, I was most turned on by Wes Montgomery for sure. And he still is, you know, the one for me. But I also around the same time discovered Kenny Burrell, who exists in it. It was very strong for me, his beautiful sense of elegance and taste and blues, and always a sound that had a bit of cut to it. It wasn't just a rolled off darker sound. I love the sparkle in his sound. Django Reinhardt, Joe Pass, Grant Green for me came a little bit later, but equally, you know, such a towering figure. T-Bone Walker, kind of various blues play. I mean, I'm going along a timeline of kind of timing of how I discovered these people.
Sure.
So you know, after college, I got very into kind of 50s blues, jump blues style. So people like T-Bone Walker, Gatemouth Brown, of course, B.B. King.
And then get into Mance Lipscomb.
Absolutely. I love that Les Blanc film about Mance. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
He's just hanging with him. I mean, it's a cinema verite. It's for people who might have the Criterion channel. I think all those Les Blanc films, which are genius, are there, and the one with Mance.
His birthplace, Mance Lipscomb's birthplace, is about 20 miles from my house, actually.
In Texas, right?
Texas, yeah.
Where were you from originally?
Well, I'm originally from the Midwest, Kansas City area. Spent a lot of my life up in DC and the Northern Virginia area, but I've been in Texas for so long now that I pretty much have to say this is home. But Mance was born and grew up in Navasota, Texas, which is
Navasota.
not too far from Houston.
Okay. So Southeast Texas.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. How about John McLaughlin? One of the things when I especially that guitar quartet you do with Julian Lage and forgive me, I forget the other two guys. That was such an amazing thing.
Chico Pinheiro and Steve Cardenas.
Yeah. Moments there reminded me. Maybe it's just because this album was big for me as a kid, but the My Goals Beyond record.
It's a great record.
Was that a record that influenced you? You think?
It wasn't a huge influence on me. I heard people talking about it for years, maybe decades before I actually listened to it or any of John McLaughlin. I came to him probably in the late 90s, really. I didn't really have a personal discovery with him until I heard the Shakti records in the late 90s. And then I heard the Remember Shakti a couple times, once at Royce Hall and once at Monterey Jazz Festival. And then at that moment, I felt very open to McLaughlin and what he was doing, and went back and listened to all of those incredible things. And he's absolutely something else. And also I've had a chance to meet him once, and he was very, very supportive, very, very warm and cool, which is something I really appreciated. I mean, as far as fusion guitarists, I got a chance to see Larry Coryell in my teens a couple times, and so I checked out those things with Gary Burton. And I, as you, loved Weather Report, and I loved Miles Davis stuff. So I heard various people playing with him, but I'd say maybe I gravitated more toward Weather Report, which was really a guitarless band, except for Jocko, who transcends everything and does. But yeah, I love that you kind of get to all of these things in due course of time. You know, I listened to Steely Dan, of course. And so, you know, I'd hear Larry Carlton and you know, the Royal Scam and Asia, all those guitar solos on those records were huge for me growing up. And then later, because I just don't want to forget him. And I'd say in the last 10 to 15 years, well, Frizzell was also a really big one for me. Very important guitarist, but Ry Cooder became extremely important to me over the last 10, 15 years, and has showed me a way to, in that same way that we've been talking about blending, of marrying the stuff that's really important to you as a musician in an authentic way and becoming, you know, your own musician. And he's got something that for me he's my favorite, you know.
Yeah, I think I wore out 2 vinyl copies of Paradise and Lunch when I was a kid. What a great record. Do you know Ry? Is he somebody you've met and worked with?
I've met him a couple of times. Also, always so warm. And he said to me, you know, he said, well, you know, you really have that standard tuning down, don't you? he's like, I'm an
backhanded compliment there. Yeah.
He was like, you really, you know, I was like, well, you know, that's what I did. I didn't even start to learn about opening open tunings till later, and started to get those down. So he thought that was, he said, well, sometime we can sit down and you can show me some of those standard tunings. I said, I don't think I'm going to have much to show you, but
it'd be nice to sit down with him. Well, let's see, man. For people who don't know, let me just give an idea of some of the amazing people you have played with. The maestro Charles Lloyd, Ron Carter, Mose Allison, Bobby Hutcherson, Joe Sample, Al Jarreau, of course, Diana Krall for years, Julian Lage, but then also, as you bend genres, Paul McCartney, Willie Nelson, Leon Russell, Aaron Neville, Barbra Streisand. Wow, man, that's amazing. Tell me about the Paul McCartney thing.
Well, that came about. Tommy LaPuma produced that record of standards that Paul did, and they were trying to figure out kind of how to make it happen and how to make it feel right. And you know, sometimes in a lot of these kinds of situations, they throw bands together. You know, there might be really a studio related band, people who can get the job done, but maybe the record doesn't shimmer. And from what I heard, Paul did not want to make that kind of record. And there was this idea that, well, use pretty much an existing band. And the idea was, well, Diana Krall has a band and a kind of world of musicians that she works with. What if we just, and so it becomes very easy to make arrangements on the fly. If you come in with a song, well, how do we want to do this? What do we want to do? Well, we sort of know what to do, and things can happen fast without too much thinking. You don't have to have maybe a bunch of written stuff. You know, maybe all you need is a lead sheet and a couple hours to throw something in. And it sounded like he was very excited about that way of working because it was closer to what the Beatles did. And so initially I got called for a number of things, and I was unavailable for some things, which, you know, when you that's another kind of call. You can get a call and they ask you to do something, and then you're like, I can't make it. So I thought, man, I'm not going to get to do this record. I was very worried. For the first sessions, that ended up being Bucky and John Pizzarelli that ended up playing together on several songs. But then there was a series of sessions, a number of things over a period of time. So I got the call again and went in with John Clayton, Jeff Hamilton, and Diana. So I mean, we just do what we do, and he was so open to every single idea, so creative in the studio, so natural, so, you know, sings so beautifully every time. You know, there was one of the songs we did, I played a solo and I was okay with it, but I didn't love it. I said, well, you know, if this ends up being the track, I'm happy to do my solo, you know, over again. And he said, oh, we won't be doing this record that way, mate. And he said, your solo's great. If that's the take, that's the take. And, so, you know, he was just cool and very, very, as I say, I just love when people that are legends like that are so down to earth, so encouraging of what you do and welcome you that way. So it was super cool.
Yeah, that's cool. And man, you've played with legends, you've been around them, but I would have to think that first time you went in the studio with Paul McCartney, you had to have a moment of, wow, I'm in the studio.
Unreal.
I mean, unreal, right?
He walks in the room, you know, and it's sort of like, whoa, why am I here? This is insane. This is incredible. And he came up and he saw my archtop guitar that's built by a luthier named John Monteleone. And at that time that we made those sessions, there had just been, or was even continuing, it was still at the Metropolitan Museum, an exhibit of guitars of John D'Angelico, Jim DeQuisto, and John Monteleone, and it kind of tracked the tradition of carved guitar making in the New York area by Italian Americans. And so Paul had gone to see the exhibit. So our first encounter, I was just sitting there getting in tune, and he came in, and you know, everybody's aware that he's in the room. He came by my little station. I had several guitars, but he saw that. He said, "You have one of those?" I said, yeah, I've had it for
yes,
a while.
I do.
He said, and there's a tour manager that he works with that he called over. He said, "Remember, we went to the exhibit. He's got one of these." And he said, we saw the whole exhibit, and it's so incredible. He said, "Do you mind if I play it?" So he sat across from me, took the guitar, and I had another guitar, and we just sort of started playing a little kind of blues something, and then he said, "This is the best way to play, because you're a mirror image." He's left-handed.
Yeah.
So he said, "You've got a mirror image because I'm left-handed, and you can just we can each see what each person is doing, right, exactly like a mirror. It's just perfect." And
you were like,
so I had this moment of like, here I am sitting, just kind of picking a little blues with Paul McCartney, and it was great because it just broke the ice, and I felt like, oh man, this guy's going to be a groove to work with. And we'll have fun. So
it's kind of like you were John Lennon sitting in Paul's bedroom as kids playing guitars together. Wow, man, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. Who's somebody that you never got a chance to play with from the past, maybe that's no longer really playing, that you wish you would have?
Somebody that that just comes to mind right now, who I admire so greatly and would have loved to have been in the room with him, would be somebody like Alan Toussaint. Mm. I would have loved to have been on a record that he made, or sit with him, or play a show with him, because he's such an incredible player, such an incredible singer. It comes from such a deep tradition, as so real. I would love to feel what that would be like. Yeah. Gosh, there must be so many others that I almost wouldn't presume to play with. Some maybe to sit and play with Jim Hall would have been a very special experience that I would love to have had. I got to see him many times and met him several. He was always so cool, but never got to sit with him. And there's something about what he did, and just the absolute beauty of his playing, kind of the poetic nature of it and logic of it, that to sit and play duo or with a bass, or just to drop in when he was playing with Charlie Hayden and play with the two of them. I did get to play with Charlie a couple times, and that was always transcendent, his beat and his tone and his sound and the way he lifted up every situation he was in. But Jim Hall.
Beautiful. And part two of the question, who's someone playing today that you have not played with yet, that if you got a call later today offering to collaborate in some way, whether it's studio or gig, that would make you go, oh yeah, hell yeah, I want to play with that guy or that person?
Well, I have played back in the day a bit with Brad Mehldau, and actually he was on my first album, but it's been a very long time since I've been in contact with him. And if there were a chance to play with him these days, it would be something that I would be blown away to do. Of course, Rye, and I was also thinking of somebody like Jason Moran. He's a composer, piano player that I adore what he does. I adore the breadth of his vision, and he'd be
beautiful,
somebody.
Beautiful. Man, I cannot believe how time has gotten up on us. I want to respect your time and start winding down here. You know, maybe down the road I can talk you into doing part 2 of this, but
certainly, yes.
Let's see. Let's kind of finish, if you don't mind, with a series of rapid fire questions and just see what happens. And by the way, I'll put links in the show notes so people can all the stuff that I missed asking you about, they can look into, and hopefully that'll work for now. But let's see. Rapid fire. What's the last thing you listened to? Last thing on your turntable?
Sufjan Stevens, his album Michigan. It's right there.
Nice.
I love him, and I love that album, Michigan.
Most memorable show you ever attended?
Miles Davis.
We won't hold you to this answer. What comes to mind, though?
No, Miles Davis at the Hollywood Bowl, just when he was coming back. So kind of Man with the Horn era. Mike Stern was on guitar, Al Foster on drums, Marcus Miller on bass. He didn't play that much, and he would walk on and off stage, but it was Miles Davis. We were getting to see Miles Davis, and he was coming back.
Transcendent. Most memorable show you've played, and I know that's a really hard one, but just what comes to mind?
Also at the Hollywood Bowl, playing the first time I got to play there with my father's band. My father was a big band leader, and he played at the Playboy Jazz Festival. And I think when I was around 15 or 16 and started playing with him, we played at the Hollywood Bowl, and I looked up and I was with my dad, and we were doing that. So yeah, that's very, very meaningful. There might be other more careerish memories, but from a personal standpoint, you
can't beat that answer. And let's do the deserted island question. You can take one record. You only get to listen to one record for, we won't say forever. For the next 6 months, you can only listen to one record. What would it be?
It could be, that's so hard.
I know.
It's a really hard one. I would say Joni Mitchell, Blue.
I knew you said it. Okay.
I think I could be nourished just by that every single day.
Beautiful.
Without wanting anything else.
Okay. What pisses you off?
Non-thoughtfulness, which leads to unkindness, leads to all kinds of things. It starts from one sense of, hey, I'm here, I'm present in my thoughts, I'm aware of the other, and I just see a lot of non-thoughtfulness everywhere I go, and it pisses me off.
Amen, brother. And other than resorting to music, which is probably one of your main salves, what do you do when things are tough for you? Do you have a meditation practice? Do you have some method when things are tough to get back to your center?
I do have a non-regular meditation practice. It is something that I do from time to time, but it's not daily. but living in LA, there are, it's 10 minutes from where I live, I can get on a hiking trail, and I can be, out of the other stuff. That's big for me. Just get out on a trail and hike, move the body, and breathe some air. I mean, and then there's really great high mountains about 20 minutes away. So yeah,
beautiful. And for people who don't know you that well, kind of outside looking in, what's something that might surprise people about you?
That's a great question. They might be surprised that I'm biracial.
Okay.
So my father was Black.
Yeah.
My mom was white, and I feel like many people who don't know me at all make a certain assumption.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it says about me, personally, but it's just simply a sort of a fact that because of the way my skin is, that people would make a certain assumption and maybe not know about certain other things that I've experienced in my life, people that I might have known, what the conditions of my upbringing were and my awareness were. So
yeah, I wish we had more time. I'd ask you more about that, but maybe part 2 we can do that. Sure. All right, man. Last 2 questions, and thank you again so much for doing this. It's just been an honor talking to you and get to know you a little bit.
My pleasure.
I gave you a warning about this one because they're pretty heavy questions, but I always ask my guests these last 2 questions, and one reason why, man, I'm going to turn 67 here pretty soon, and I'm just blown away by how quickly it happened, and inevitably you start looking at your own mortality. And I've lost a lot of people, as many of us have, and then COVID, of course, we didn't get a chance to talk about how you dealt with COVID, but we lost a lot of people in COVID. So it's something, death is something kind of on the table for me more and more. So I'm always curious about what kind of concept, belief, ideas people have about what happens when we die. It's a big mystery.
Well, I feel you on that, because I lost my mom last year, in July of 2021, and it's been very difficult. We were very, very close. My father passed away in 2014, and that also was quite difficult. And I've always wondered about this. I had a half brother who died when I was almost 8 in an automobile accident, and so I've wondered about what that is, and I've thought about it, and I definitely am not a kind of a believer in afterlife. I've never been a super religious person in terms of kind of believing certain doctrines about what happens. So I've been on my own with the question, and I've as I've gotten older, the one thing I think I can say is that I think that if all of this is one grand eternal moment, both where we are right now and where the people who've passed on are, if it all exists together in one universality of a moment beyond time, then nothing happens after death other than we experience the moment in some different way. And so I have a trust that I'm okay with the open-endedness of it, and the fact that there are exploding, dying galaxies out there that we see the light of, and it's millions of light years away. And then just over this recent period, been having moments where I feel like I'm in some conversation with my mother, and so that makes me feel like, oh yeah, there she is, she's right there, she's not someplace else, she's in a different form, she's not she, but we're having this conversation, and it also doesn't even really feel like a conversation. It's not even words, it's something else going on. So yeah, an idea of just some unified now that's big enough to hold and contain something. It holds this kind of time-bound illusion that we're in, and it also holds something we could never understand or fathom.
I love that answer. Thank you. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Last question.
Okay.
So when you are dead and gone, what do you hope people are saying about you when you're no longer here?
That's an amazing question. And yeah, for me, it comes down to, well, when I think of the people that I've lost, that mean something to me, it usually centers around, that was a very kind person, a loving person, thoughtful person, a genuine person. My father, who, had this great career as a musician, people come and they'll say, I heard the band, he was such an incredible musician, he was one of the great arrangers, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, once you filter down, and then there'll be some story of his kindness or how he took an interest or always listened. My mom was that way as well. It's like she was this formidable person, intensely opinionated, blah, blah, blah. She was, people say, I never had a better friend, and these kind of things, I think those are the things that last in people's hearts. And that's kind of what you want to hear. Also, the person was a good time to be around. If people think I was a good time to be around, then I'll be happy with that as well.
Man, I think people will be saying that about you. They're probably already saying it. I can tell you. I mean, I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone. I've really enjoyed talking to you and really appreciate it. And I hope that maybe sometime down the future our paths cross in person. If I'm ever in one of your audiences, I'll wave vociferously to you. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for doing this, man.
Thanks. It's really my pleasure to be here, John. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.